Hey everyone, my name is Lauren Davis, and I have the honor of serving on staff here at Wichita First Church. This Sunday, we started a new sermon series called Unstuck, where Pastor Scott preached on bitterness. He showed us that bitterness is what keeps us from living whole and holy lives. That to live a life of bitterness is to live a life separate from the goodness of God and the experiences that God so desperately wants us to share with Him. Thanks for joining. I hope you enjoyed the message.
The teaching text today is Hebrews 12:14 through 17. Make every effort to live in peace with everyone and to be holy. Without holiness, no one will see the Lord. See to it that no one falls short of the grace of God, and that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many. See that no one is sexually immoral or is godless like Esau, who, for a single meal, sold his inheritance rights as the oldest son. Afterward, as you know, when he wanted to inherit this blessing, he was rejected. Even though he sought the blessing with tears, he could not change what he had done. This is the word of the Lord. You may be.
Well, from here on out, I just want to let you know that I'm going to be adopting a Belizean accent to make the sermon that much more interesting. You know, man. That's terrible. When I was about 9 years old, actually all the way through my boyhood, I, like many of our kids did this summer, I went to kids camp. And kids camp was at Camp Maranatha in Maxwell, Nebraska. Now, if you don't know where Maxwell, Nebraska is, that's because nobody knows where Maxwell, Nebraska is. And we were there all of my elementary years. We went to camp, except for a couple of years. We went to another camp further in western Nebraska and discovered that the camp had rattlesnakes. And I think someone wisely decided that 10-year-olds and rattlesnakes at camp probably didn't mix. And so we went back to Camp Maranatha. And at Camp Maranatha, they had all this whole grounds that you would explore, from the chapel to the snack shack. And then they had this little miniature golf kind of thing. And then right next to the miniature golf thing were these trampolines. Now, there's a reason that insurance is expensive. And it's because of trampolines at camps like Camp Maranatha. These were trampolines, and when I say trampoline, it wasn't up on the legs. It was like they dug a pit out, and then they'd stretched a trampoline over the pit. Are you following? You get a picture in your mind? And so I'm there. I'm 8, 9, 10 years old, whatever it is. I don't know much about trampolines, and so I'm watching these people do flips and all these things and land on their stomach and land on their back, and I'm thinking, man, that looks amazing. And so I get on the trampoline, I'm jumping around, people are watching me. There's some girl that's a little older that I thought was really cute, and I thought I was showing off for her, and she was really impressed with how I'm jumping. And then I decide, I've never done it before, but I decide that what I'm going to do is I'm going to land on my stomach, and then I'll bounce back up. Are you with me? Anyone? Right? And so what I didn't realize is how gravity works and how momentum works. And so I'm kind of leaning forward, and I landed, and I don't know how it's possible for your legs, I'm on my stomach, for your legs to go over your body and touch your shoulders, but that's what happened. And those of you who know what happens in a moment like that, I had my breath taken away. Have you ever had your breath taken away from you where you, and so there I am, 8, 9, 10, I'm thinking, I'm going to die. This is it, in front of this girl that I think is cute, I'm going to die, right here. And this is why am I telling you this story? Well, this is kind of a metaphor. I'm choked up now. I'm remembering all that. So many things. When you have an experience in life that you think is going to be one thing, and you go through the experience, and it's like your breath is taken away, not in a positive way. And then you're sure in that moment, because of that experience that you had, that it's always going to be like this. Have you ever had a moment like that in life? In the word that we're talking about throughout the course of this series we're launching today, it's the experience of being stuck. Have you ever been stuck? The book of Hebrews was written to people whose lives were being shaken. In other words, people who were stuck and afraid. Now, Scott, how do you know that? Well, You could go to Hebrews chapter 11, which precedes Hebrews chapter 12. Hebrews chapter 11, if you know, is very famously known as the faith chapter, or the hall of fame of faith. And it just lists person after person who through faith did all these marvelous, marvelous things. And why do you write a chapter like that? Why do you put a chapter in the Bible of all these people who went through all of these difficult things? One thing after another, terrible things, awful things, hideous things. Why would you write that? It's not to just say, look how great these people were. The writer wrote it to encourage people who were about to fall apart and give them vision and hope. So I got to tell you this, okay? The Bible, I don't know what you think about the Bible, but most of the Bible is written to encourage people who are in the middle of a struggle. Here's what that means. If you are struggling, the Bible is for you. Good news. And the message of the Bible is a vision of your transformation. You can go from a stuck place to an unstuck place with the power of God. We're going to talk about that this morning. Now, we have several values that we are working to inculcate into the life of our local congregation. One of them is we believe in transformation. So I'm going to put the words up on the screen here. And would you read this out loud with me? Could you do that? Ready? The whole thing. Ready? Here we go. We believe in transformation. God's grace means you aren't stuck, and there's always more to come. That's what this series is about the common places that we get stuck. If you've been stuck, welcome to the human family. It's the common human experience to get stuck. But we're going to talk about how God's grace helps us to get unstuck. Now, I'm going to talk really specifically about one way that you and I get stuck. It's more common than we think. It's bitterness. It's bitterness. Well, I want to talk to you about the pitfalls of life and how we get into places where bitterness grips us. And then I want to talk to you about a better vision for life. And then if you're going to get through the pitfalls of life and you're going to find a better vision for life, then you better know the source of life. Talk about those three things. Now, again, I got to set the Bible in context. If you don't have the context of the Bible, what you'll end up thinking is that the Bible's kind of like Aesop's fables. Aesop's fables, you know, all these little kind of stories. And if you've read them, hopefully you did in English class. And what you're supposed to do when you read Aesop's fable is get the little moral or the little meaning for your life. And many people, when they read the Bible, they think, well, that's it. You know, it's like all these disconnected things. No. It's actually a story. Hebrews is actually a letter, and it's written to these struggling people who are struggling with life and faith. And Hebrews 11 is this chapter of encouragement. And then Hebrews 12 is this encouragement in light of the example of Hebrews chapter 11. And this is what the writer in Hebrews chapter 12, verse 3 says. Listen, okay? Consider him, that's Jesus, who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not, what? Grow weary and lose heart. Here's the pitfalls of life. You and I can get worn down, and then our heart caves. Let me give you two ways that pitfall gets expressed. You just get worn down, right? Life just happens, you get worn down. It can just be the grind of the routine. Here's what I'm thinking of when I was writing the sermon this week. I was thinking about the person, and there's a lot of you that fit this category. You're a long-time Christian. You've just been at this. You've seen people in the church come and go. You've seen pastors come and go. You've seen people live. You've seen people born. You've seen people married. You've seen people died. You've just kind of been through it all. And honestly, where you are right now is you're kind of jaded. Like, well, you know, I've seen it all. Nothing new under the sun. How do you get into that place? I just want to suggest to you, it's what the writer to Hebrews is talking about right here, is that you grow weary and you lose heart. Or it's just that one of the other places the pitfalls of life come at us is through just the pains of going through life. You know what no one tells you about being an adult? Life is hard. You don't know that, right? You're a kid or a teenager, and it's like life might seem difficult, but then you become an adult, and then you realize that life actually is difficult. Do you know what I'm saying? No one tells you that, and so what happens is, if you're not careful, is that you end up going through the motions. And it's like, one more hard thing, and then another hard thing. Well, how do you get into that place? Well, you go weary, and you lose heart. So Hebrews 12 is this series of encouragements and warnings. I'll give you a couple of them. We talked about one of them last week, actually, and it just highlighted here in Hebrews chapter 12. The writer says, listen, if you go through hardship, that you're to endure it as discipline because God is treating you as his children. Remember, if you're here last week, I talked to you about, like, if things are hard, that's a test. And then the writer goes on and he says, hey, listen. In fact, what you're going to need to do if you're not going to give in to the pitfalls of life is you're going to have to strengthen your feeble arms and your weak knees. Go to the gym. Come on. Now, why this chapter? Why these encouragement? Why all these warnings? Because here's what struggles can do to you and me. They can make you bitter. I just want to suggest to you, if you're taking notes, that struggles contain the seed of bitterness. Have you ever been, those of you who've been around the church for a while, have you ever been around the church and then the church, whoever that is, the church did, the church or someone in the church or a person that you feel ought to know better, they do something and it makes you angry or you get hurt? Have you ever been hurt in the church? And then this little seed of distrust gets planted into your heart. And you find yourself resistant. You know what that is? It's bitterness. Or maybe you go to work and you give your best at work and you work really hard and you put in the time, you put in the hours, you have a good work ethic. And then what happens is either someone else takes the credit for what you've done or you're somehow taken advantage of at work. And what happens is your heart just steps back a little bit and forms this little protective barrier. And you're like, I don't want that to happen again. What is that? That's bitterness. Or someone didn't love you back. You hoped they would love you. You gave yourself to them, maybe a friendship, maybe a romantic relationship, and it just didn't work. And you think, I don't know if I want to do that again. I don't want to put my heart out there. And this little protective barrier, this little seed grows up in your heart. And you go, I don't think I want to do that. And what's growing in your heart at that moment? You're getting bitter. Tim Keller, if you're around, you hear me talk about him all the time. I'm a fan of his. He passed away, pastor in New York City, and he was telling a story about how he had a gentleman come up to him one time, and he said, he's talking about bitterness, and he came up to him one time and said, I was in a Japanese internment camp in World War II, and I hate people who are Japanese now, and I don't know what to do. What happened? Well, that man was imprisoned then, wasn't he? I mean, he was obviously in prison, but he was even more in prison at that moment than he was when he was imprisoned. Are you with me? What had happened? This little seed had got planted in his heart, this little seed of distrust, and he became bitter. Now, I want you to not miss what the writer to Hebrews tells us in verse 15. See to it that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many. Now, everyone who's Gen Z is going to love the fact that the Greek word for root is rhiza. Now, if you don't know why Gen Z would like that, you ask them at lunch and they will explain it to you, I hope. Right? Rhiza, and the bitterness is a reference to a plant. Have you ever eaten something and you take a bite of it and you don't expect it to be bitter and you go, ugh. Here's how one commentator described it. He said, bitterness is an experience where what is unpleasant, unexpected, or undesired is prominent. Unpleasant, unexpected, undesired is prominent. Well, that happens, right? That's just the reality in life. Bitter things are going to happen to us in life. That happens. But here's how it remains in us, is then we can't get past the taste of that experience, and it's what we taste in every experience now. That's bitterness. And I promise you what it does, it works on your heart. And here's what it tells your heart. This is what one of the commentators said. I don't usually quote commentators. I've done it twice now because usually they're boring, but this is what they said. Satan wants us to believe that the difficulties in life are proof that God does not love us. We go through something difficult, and we say to ourselves, it's unpleasant, it's unexpected, or it's undesired, and we say, God, if you loved me, this wouldn't be happening. And then what happens is the root of bitterness goes down, and what comes up is the bitterness tree. I asked people on Facebook this week, I said, hey, what does bitterness feel like you? And this is like the bitterness tree. I've got a list here. We'll put it up on the screen. Can you put that up for me? These are things some of you said. an ulcer, soul being crushed, corrosive, slow rot, deep loss of connection, hatred, bottomless pit, a drag on my soul, rotting flesh, envy, poison that eats you, cancer, betrayal, bondage. The more you hold it, the more damage it does. Lack of hope, nightmares, stinky, smoldering pile of toxicity, jealousy and hate, darkness, clinging to negativity, resentment, cynicism, worthlessness, a prison. Now, the writer to Hebrews, he gives us actually a story. For those of you who've been here all summer, you know we've been going through the book of Genesis, and you didn't expect us to go. You thought, well, we left that. And we're right back into the book of Genesis because it's the story of Esau. We talked about Jacob, his brother, last week. Jacob and Esau were twins. Esau was born first. His name means red or hairy, and that's what he was. He was like this ruddy, hairy guy. He was like a man's man. He was like an alpha male. That was Esau. And in a moment of impulsivity, because that's what you're to get when you read the life of Esau, his brother, he comes in, he's famished, he's been out hunting, and his brother's making some stew, some red stuff, the text says, and he says in an impulsive moment, give me some of that red stuff. That's how the original language. Give me that right now. Give it to me. I want it. And his brother sees his opportunity and he says, aha, I'll tell you what, you're the oldest. Give me your birthright. I'll give you some stew. And he says, what is a birthright to me? A moment of complete impulsivity. A seed's being planted in his heart. Impulsive as he can possibly be. And he says, what does it matter to me? Just give me the food. And then what happens as a result of that impulsive moment is he loses the birthright, he loses the blessing. The text in Genesis says that when he found out that he'd been tricked out of his blessing and his birthright by his brother from his own act of impulsivity, he wept aloud. What's happening? The seed of bitterness, the root of bitterness is starting to grow out of him. And then he comes to his brother Jacob and he says, I'm going to kill you. And Esau is an example, and you go through the text there, and he says there's three things that are existing in Esau's life. He's not at peace, he has no grace, and he's bitter. And this is this warning. The warning about Esau is that he was, the text says worldly. It's maybe not the greatest translation of the word because it's a broader word. And what it means is it's someone who's foolish. They're stuck here in the world. They have no greater vision than this current moment. And that word right there is a way to describe worldly. It's like this is it. This is all that I have. I'm going to tell you, this is what the warning in the text is. You demand satisfaction from life and how it is, and right now, I have to be satisfied right now. That's the seed, the root of bitterness. That's where it comes from. I have to have the satisfaction right now. It's the difficulties of life. It's the painful places of life. Well, you and I have to have a vision for life, though. We can't just stay in all of the difficulty. And actually, the text gives us a vision. And maybe you haven't read it this way. Maybe you haven't thought of it this way. Hebrews 12:14, make every effort to live at peace with everyone. And then this three-word sentence, it's in bold right there. Can you say it out loud with me? What? To be holy, without which no one will see the Lord. Now, that's interesting, isn't it? We talked about bitterness and then holiness. I don't understand. Now, I don't know what you think about holiness. We're actually talking about it all the way through this series. Maybe what comes to your mind is you go, oh, you're talking about someone who is holier than thou. Or maybe you think, well, that's someone who's out of touch with how life actually is. Or maybe you think, holy, who in the world could actually be holy? That's actually impossible. We're actually a holiness denomination, a church, a global tribe, that the message of holiness is our message. And if holiness means you're better than other people and you're self-righteous about it and you're out of touch and that it's impossible, then we're kind of in trouble as a denomination, right? That's a problem for us. Holiness, let me reframe it for you. Holiness is actually a vision from God for your life and how your life could be. Here's how C.S. Lewis said it. He said, how little people know who think holiness is dull. When one meets the real thing, it is irresistible. So if you thought about it, if you could understand, I'm going to paint this picture for you here in a second. It's a vision for your life. Because what is bitterness? What bitterness is when you have no vision other than the unpleasant experience that you've been through. Are you following? Bitterness is no vision. Holiness is a vision. So let me flesh this out for you in the scriptures. 1 Peter, he writes this, and he says, just as he who called you is holy, that's God who called you, so be holy in all you do. And then he reaches back to Leviticus, for it is written, be holy because I am holy. Let me tell you what this is. This is an invitation from God to experience what it is that God experiences, which is holiness. Now, stay with me. If someone has something good and has the ability to share it with you, would you take it? So if someone said to you, be happy, and again, this person has the resources to give you, and they're not diminished by sharing it with you, they're just going to give it to you. They said to you, now be happy because I'm happy. Be wealthy because I'm wealthy. Be healthy because I'm healthy. So here's this marvelous person out of their generosity saying, hey, listen, I know you might be struggling in this moment, but however you currently are, here, I want to share with you what I have. Would you take those things if they offered them to you? I hope you're all like, yeah, well, sure, please tell me. So here's what holiness is. It's an invitation from God to experience what God experiences. However you currently are going through life, apparently God says you can be holy. It's a better vision. Let me give you 3 ways that God's vision for your life will transform you. Number 1, it's a vision about how you're going to be made whole. I think about that word holy, and I think immediately my mind goes to the word whole, W-H-O-L-E, complete. Holy, complete, full of love. Who is more complete? Who is more full of love? Who is more whole than God? We're Christians, and so we believe that God is a Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. It's this kind of mysterious way of understanding the character and nature of God that goes beyond our ability to fully define what God is like. But here's what we mean by it. Here's what we understand by it. What it means is God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit has absolutely no needs. God is not needy. Elon Musk is needy. Did you know that? He's one of the wealthiest men in the world. Elon Musk needs people. Now, of course, there are some people Elon Musk can do without because he can just hire it done. But there are some people he cannot do without. And he needs an accountant. He needs lawyers. He needs people who will run his businesses. He needs people who will, but he may want those people. He may desire a relationship with those people. But that's because in the end, he needs them. And so let me paint the picture for you. That's what I'm trying to say to you. You can't amass enough money or gain enough power to escape neediness. You and I can't. That's what it means to be a human being. We always have needs. We operate out of a place of need. But God is not like you and me. Listen, you add nothing to God. God does not need you in any way. And so because God is not needy, there's nothing God is trying to make up for like Elon Musk and me and you. He's not trying to do any of that. He's completely confident. So that sounds like bad news, Scott. No, let me tell you the good news along with this. That means when God creates you, he creates you out of sheer joy and out of desire. In other words, God creates you out of pure love. There's no need in it. Are you following me? God can run this world without you just fine, but he doesn't want to do that. He wants to share his completeness with you. Are you following me? So if you're taking notes, first thing, a holy person is a whole person. Second, it's a vision. Holiness is a vision about how you act in the world. Jesus said this really interesting thing in the Sermon on the Mount, his core teaching, Matthew 5, 6, and 7. If you want to read what's the core teaching of Jesus, you'd find it right there. And he says something really interesting. He's famous for saying that we're to love our enemies. We know this, right? And he says something at the end of that in Matthew chapter 5, verse 48, after he gives this little discursus on loving our enemies. He says something that sounds impossible. He says, be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. Now, I read that and I go, what? What are you talking about? How in the world am I going to be perfect? Well, he's pointing to something very, very specific. What's the perfection of your heavenly Father? You would back up in the passage, and he says, here's what God does. He sends his Son on the evil and the good. He sends his rain on the just and the unjust. Stay with me. In other words, God always rises above how he's been treated and responds with love and kindness. Are you following me? So, think about your life for a second. What if you were able to rise above your current circumstances and respond always with love and kindness and with grace? Like you've been through something unpleasant, unexpected, undesired, but you could respond differently. Well, that's what holiness is. It's a vision, because a holy person, if you're taking notes, is full of love and grace. Third thing, it's a vision for how you handle the pitfalls of life. We're going to do a series in a month or two on the book of Daniel, and if you know that story, Daniel and the lions, and there's Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Were there Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Daniel in the lion's den. Anybody? And if anybody had an occasion for bitterness, it would have been those 4 men who were taken from their home, were forced to be refugees everywhere. Their entire life was uprooted, stolen from them. I mean, talk about an unpleasant or unexpected or undesired experience. I mean, they had it. They had the pitfalls of life. If anybody had the right to be bitter, it would be them. I want you to notice something just in the scene when they're thrown into the fiery furnace. This is not a mistake in the text. The king is talking, and he's seen these men thrown into the fire, and the king answered and said, "But I see 4 men." They threw 3. "I see 4 men," and then he says this word, "unbound, walking in the midst of fire, and they're not hurt, and the appearance of the 4th is like the son of the gods." In other words, it's literal and it's metaphorical, because it's saying in the middle of the most difficult circumstances of your life, you can be unbound. You can face the pitfalls of life. If you're taking notes, a holy person knows God's presence enables them to rise above the moment. Now, let's review. Holy person, they're whole. They're full of love. They're unbound by their circumstances. Here's how Hebrews 12 says those exact same things. A holy person, this is wonderful. I loved this. I went, oh, this is good. Someone should have preached this a long time ago. I'm going to preach it today. You're welcome. A holy person, they're at peace. They're whole, meaning they're whole. They're animated by grace, so they're a graceful person. They're full of love. They're not bitter. They're unbound by their circumstances. How are you doing when you read that list, right? Don't you want that? I mean, maybe you're like, I don't know if I could be holy. Well, I would love to be at peace. I'd love to be a person of grace. I'd love to be able to not give in to bitterness. I'd love that. Well, wonderful news. Holiness is God's vision for your life. Sounds a lot like an antidote to bitterness to me. Well, what's the source of life? And we're going to end here in just a moment. Bitterness, the pitfalls of life. Like, how would you solve the conundrum? Like, hey, people are going through difficulty. I think we would fill in that sentence that's there in the text. We see to it that no one. How would you fill in the blank? See to it that no one blank. What? What would you say? See to it that no one is immoral. I mean, that's it says that in the text. Don't be immoral. If people would just be more moral today, we'd solve all of our problems. That's what's wrong with the world. Or what would you say? See to it that no one fails to pray enough. That's the people's problem. They don't pray enough. They need to pray more. Or would you say maybe today, hey, see to it that no one is a Democrat because they're the problem. Or see to it that no one is a MAGA Republican, right? If we could just solve that, we'd be done with the problems in the world. Or maybe you would just say, well, see to it that no one is bitter. Why are you even preaching a sermon on this? Just get over it already. What's the text say? See to it that no one falls short, what? Of the grace of God. That's God's answer to the human dilemma. Do you see this? The grace of God is the source of light. Now, I'm going to translate that for you. The grace of God means that your situation is not final. Esau's wasn't. I know Esau's the example there, but the warning is there about don't respond in the moment with this impulsive thing that plants a seed of bitterness. But if you know the story of Esau's life, you realize that's not final. Do you know that? We read it, I think, a little bit of it last week. Genesis 33, verse 4. Esau and Jacob reconcile. But Esau ran to meet Jacob and embraced him. He threw his arms around his neck and kissed him, and they wept. What happened? That meant Esau's impulsivity and his bitterness was not the final definition of his life. Are you with me? Now, how do you know? Well, I'm going to do this fast. Hebrews 12. the writer of Hebrews says, well, I'll tell you how you know. I'll tell you how you know. He says, you have to know where he's going with this, but he says, you haven't come to a mountain that can be touched and that's burning with fire, to darkness and gloom and storm. He's referencing Moses going up to the 10 Commandments. And he said, in other words, you're not coming to a law meant to condemn your heart and actions. Don't you feel that the fear of condemnation is heavy on the human heart in our current cultural moment? It's like it's everywhere. You know those weighted blankets that you can buy? It's like condemnation is one of those weighted blankets, but it has chains that tie you down. Are you feeling that? You haven't come to that. You haven't come to condemnation. No, you've come to Mount Zion, to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem. Now, I don't have time to go through all of this, but Mount Zion is also Mount Moriah, where Abraham took his son Isaac up, and he's going to sacrifice his son Isaac. And God says, no, not Isaac. Here's the lamb. Do you know what else happened on Mount Moriah? Jesus on the cross, the Lamb of God, who died for the sins of the world. That's what he said. You've come to that. To Jesus, chapter 12, verse 24, to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. In other words, you have come to the grace of God in your life. Listen, an option in the middle of your life is the grace of God. An option in the middle of the pitfalls of your life is the grace of God. An option in the middle of your bitterness is the grace of God. Life shakes you. That is what life does. Now listen, almost done. At that time, his voice shook the earth. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 26. But now he has promised, once more I will shake not only earth, but also the heavens. The words once more indicate the removing of what can be shaken. That is, created things. So let me translate. If you are feeling shaken by life, if you are bitter in any way, that is wonderful news, because that's a sign that God's grace isn't done with you. All of those things are things that can be shaken. And God is removing what cannot be shaken from you when you go through something difficult. If you're taking notes, struggle removes what can be shaken so you can become unshakable. I have this pen right here. I know it doesn't look like a pen, and maybe you've been wondering, what is going on with the Christmas decoration on the stage? What's he going to do with that? And this is, for me, functions as a picture. I've shared this with you before, but it may have been during COVID and no one remembers, so here we go. Do you know when you're trying to go somewhere and there were the old days when you would pull out a map, but now you pull out that device, right, that we all carry in our pockets, and you put in the destination where you're going to go. And you know how when you put the destination, you know what it does, right? It doesn't matter if you have an Apple or an Android. What does it do? It drops what? A pin, right? Drops a pin. And your destination is then set. That's where you're going to go. And you know what happens when you get off the route? Because the destination's already been decided and set, and the great algorithm in the sky knows where you're headed. Do you know what I'm talking about? It knows where you're headed. You know what it says? Rerouting. Or if you get really lost, it'll say, return to the route. Return to the route. It should add, return to the route, dummy. Return to the route. What is it going to do? It's infallibly going to take you to the destination. The destination that God has decided for your life is that you would be holy, meaning that you would be full of grace and not bitter and at peace. And God's Holy Spirit, this is what we believe as the Church of the Nazarene, is we believe that God's Holy Spirit will guide you to the destination He's already decided for your life. I have this picture. You may have been wondering, this picture behind me. It's my favorite picture from the Olympics. They did the surfing in Tahiti, and this is a guy coming off of a wave, and he knows that he did well, and it's like the picture of a lifetime, right? He's kind of suspended there in midair. For me, it's a picture of someone who's unstuck. They're like, oh, I know something just happened, but it's all good. It's all good. It's all good. Well, I'm going to pray for you. Jay's going to come give us a couple next steps, and then I want you, if you would, we're going to do this thing. We're going to do it often and almost all the time. We're going to have some people down front who, if you want someone to pray for you, they'll pray for you. They're going to come here in just a moment at the close of the service. And here's what we're trying to create. We don't want you to just come in here and sing some songs and go, I like that song, or I didn't like that song. Listen to a message, oh, that helped me, or that didn't help me. We want you to come and encounter God. And so we want to create some space at the end of the service where you can, if you want, you can linger. You can sit in your seat. Someone will pray for you. You can kneel at the altar. Listen, when you come down front in a place like this, here's what you are admitting. You are admitting that you are a person who has needs. Guess what? Every person in this room is a human being like you with needs. And so it's not an admission of failure. It's an admission of humanity. And so when we're done with the service, I'd love for you, we want to cultivate that. It's going to take us a little bit, but we're going to cultivate that. So I want to invite you, if you would you bow your heads and pray with me? God, I know in this room, quite literally every person in a seat has been through some things. There has come some trouble in their life. And Lord, I know that in a room like this, there are also some people who the unpleasantness of that experience has lodged in their soul and it's become a bitter root. Lord, I thank you that your grace is greater than our bitter roots. It digs all the way underneath what has been planted in us and uproots it. So I pray for my friend who's bitter today, who's struggling with where they're stuck in life and doesn't see a way out, that they would see the vision you've planted for their life. You've already decided what the destination is, and you yourself have promised to go with us on the journey and get us to where you've said we can go. So today, we want to surrender control of our life to you. Lord, I know for many of us in the room, we've gotten all of you, we've said, God, we need you, but we need to give all of us to you. And so, Lord, I pray for the person who is ready and willing to say, God, you have all of me, including my bitterness. I want a heart that's at peace, full of grace and not bitter. Please take out my heart of stone and put in a heart of flesh. Lord, I ask for this in your name. All God's people said.
In this message, Pastor Scott helped us to define holiness. In his words, he described it as getting unstuck. If you want to get unstuck, we want to help you. The best way for you to reach out is by filling out our Connect card. You can fill that out by clicking the link below or scanning the QR code here on the screen. We want to help you in every way possible. And by filling out this Connect card, you're giving our staff permission to reach out and pray for you specifically in your needs. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.